where does this knowledge reside? Within the teacher, within the researcher, and all those kinds of things. So Cochrane, Smith, and Little, they talk about teacher as researcher. Teacher is really looking into their own knowledge. So these are various ways the study of teaching takes place, and these are the various strands that we discuss in the study of teaching. I would like to turn our attention to Fenstermacher's work, and he has published in Journal of Curriculum Studies and Educational Theory, and he's a philosopher. And let me read about what Fenstermacher talks about his own theory. It's very interesting to see how his theory sort of is very different. Although his knowledge is in practical knowledge, he focuses on practical knowledge, but his theory is very different. It has a nice alternative dimensions to it. The notion of practical arguments is based on the ability of teachers to use morally defensible, rationally grounded ways to educate their students. Teachers in this propositional statement refers not only to school teachers, but all teachers. That includes the teachers at the university as well. For the study of teaching, Fenstermacher borrowed his ideas from Aristotle. Aristotle's ideas are called theoretical wisdom and practical wisdom. Fenstermacher makes a clear distinction between the generation of knowledge in theory or theoretical wisdom, and the application of knowledge in use, action, or practical wisdom. He states that the argument of knowledge generation concludes in propositions, assertions, claims about events, states, or phenomena, whereas the argument of knowledge application contains empirically testable assertions that terminate in actions. So you see the difference. One is knowledge claims propositional knowledge claims, the other one terminates in action. Adapting Thomas Green's 1983 work, Fenstermacher argues that the value of education research for educational practice is the help it provides in identifying what is required to change the truth value of the premises of the practical argument in the mind of the teacher, or to complete or modify those premises, or to introduce an altogether new premise into the practical argument in the mind of the teacher. So the change in premises and actions taken must be based on teachers' moral convictions and beliefs about the nature of teaching. Teachers themselves must determine the change in the practical arguments to accommodate new ones. The application of new practices based on normative or prescriptive theories in the classroom is trivial, because the teacher practical arguments are purposive, passionate, intuitive, and moral properties of human action. It's filled with emotions, and it's as heart and soul to a teacher. So the criterion of benefit of the study of teaching is not for improving educational practice. This might go against what we always talked about, but rather for improving the practical arguments in the minds of teachers. So that's what we should strive for, to improve the practical arguments of the teacher rather than looking at education, changing educational practices. Therefore, inquirers of teaching might want to frame their problem of inquiry around the practical arguments advanced by teachers. Accordingly, research methodology must be appropriate to generate knowledge and understanding of the quality that may be considered valuable by a teacher. Fenstermacher suggests that we should supply teachers with the means to structure their experiences in ways that continually enlarge their knowledge, reason, belief, understanding, autonomy, authenticity, and sense of place. To attain this type of pedagogical competence, Fenstermacher outlines two important steps to assist teachers in framing the practical arguments undergirding their teaching practices, which many are not likely to be consciously known by the teacher. When you ask a teacher about her or his teaching, they will not be able to articulate by themselves. It's only with the so-called other, when the tacit knowledge is brought to the surface, the teacher will be able to understand what that teacher is thinking about and why this person is doing what he or she is doing. Then it's also important to assist in the teacher's appraisal of the premises in the practical arguments by presenting evidence that bears on his own relevant practices. So when these steps are carried out on an ongoing basis, the teacher learns from his or her own practices. Fenstermacher considers teachers who teach teachers in this way are themselves students of teaching. So we ourselves who teach teachers, even the scientists, engineers, whoever are teaching teachers, we need to consider ourselves as students of teaching. And we will not simply toss research findings at teachers with the expectation that these findings will show up in practice. Now, I would like to take you through the 3 steps, or the 4 steps that there are various phases that you can structure this experience for the teacher. The key thing is the so-called other. I might even say the expert other is important to help students lay their framework or lay their practical arguments. So the other, with empathy, with much intellectual empathy, helps teachers to draw out the reasons why they are acting certain way. And for this purpose, we usually videotape their lessons, and we look at certain teaching incidents, and we ask teachers to look at their teaching and think, what arguments can you give? What reasons are there for you to act the way you did? So it's through a dialogue and elicitation of beliefs about approaches to teaching and student learning which begins the construction of practical argument. Teachers, unless we develop a mutual trust, they are not going to trust the other. It's mostly, because teachers are normally very sensitive about their teaching. So teachers will not simply give you the answers or the reasons unless you develop this mutual trust. And when someone elicits their ideas or the practical arguments, you can find at least 4 premises. Value premise is, what is the value in this? What value premise does a teacher show in the teaching that she did? For example, if the teacher is exploring children's ideas and using those ideas to lay as a theoretical framework for curriculum development, then the teacher sees value in it. Situational premise describes the context in which the teacher's action takes place. Teachers might take the students to Lake Erie watersheds and use probes and sensors, and the knowledge is developing within a situational premise. Empirical premise, teachers might want to experiment with their own ideas in the classroom. They might say, okay, here are 4 theories about the idea of dissolving, and do they really work out in the classroom? Can I actually explore students' ideas in the classroom? Stipulative premise defines, interprets, establishes meaning. When the teacher gets these 4 ideas, the children's ideas about dissolving, the teacher might make sense by paralleling these theories, children's theories, to the scientific theories. So the historical theories or the early theories. So he's making meaning, stipulative premises, teacher establishes meaning. And the second phase is appraising teacher beliefs. It's not only important to elicit, but also appraise teacher beliefs. How does one go about appraising teacher beliefs? Because we have certain standards of teaching which we consider as defensible, which has the moral values. So we appraise those, appraise teacher beliefs against the beliefs that we think are contextually defensible. And the phase 3 is called the reconstructing teacher beliefs. So we help teachers by looking at their own premises, and then we add to those premises the alternative ones. And I would like to use the word add because we are not in the business of changing teachers' conceptions. So that's not our business. If the teachers want to change, that's fine. But usually when the old premise, the teacher premise, and the new premise are provided to them, they themselves, I have noticed, they reject their old premise, sometimes they reconfigure it, and sometimes they elaborate their premises. So the other begins to probe and check the elicited argument along normative dimensions and introduce new premises and practices for teacher consideration. So going back to the other ways of studying teacher knowledge, like I talked about the personal knowledge, personal practical knowledge, and then the reflective knowledge, Schoen's ideas. All these are very good ideas. All these have been, they have a lot of value in it, a lot of sense in it, and they are really wonderful. But the knowledge stops there. It doesn't have this evaluative component to it, like Fenstermacher does. Fenstermacher talks about the epistemic value or epistemic merit. What merit to all the other ways of looking at teaching? Yeah, that's key to me. I think when it has epistemic merit, then it stands against, it stands for standards, it stands for something. Otherwise, the knowledge is only knowledge, just expression, it's just reflections, it's just a way of thinking about something. But it's important that evaluation of teacher premises is important. Just a few more slides. By the way, we did some studies here in Detroit, and Jazlin Ebenezer is one of them. It's in progress, and Wood, Ebenezer, and Boone, that's in progress too. And we've looked at teacher practical arguments. One, Wood, Ebenezer, and Boone seems a stronger study. It followed a lot of principles that talks about how to go about eliciting premises and appraising the premises as well as evaluating those. I'm going to give you all of this. Looking to the future. This is very important. So where do we go from here? This is where, what is important is to look at the framework for K through 12 science education, which has been released, or which was released in 2012. And this has 3 intertwined K to 12 dimensions. One is the scientific and engineering practices, cross-cutting concepts, disciplinary core ideas. This talks about the what, how, and the why of science. And so all these 3 are intertwined. They cannot be separated into strands. These 3 strands, they come together and they are strong when they are together. So we need to look at that. So when teachers are introduced to these intertwined dimensions of science learning, they do need to change. So why teacher change is necessary? There are 3 reasons I've given why teacher change is necessary, because the sciences of learning that we look at now is very different. I was talking to the gentleman there, and he said, things have changed, learning has changed. So I agreed with him, and that's one of them, because current knowledge about science learning is very different. So how do we help teachers come on board or make changes? Classroom discourse. What sort of discourse takes place in the classroom? Most often we have this IRE, initiation, response, and then evaluation. Teachers always initiate a question, students respond, and then they evaluate it. Instead, the present classroom discourse is talking about dialogic discourse, reasoned dialogic discourse, and it's event, evidence, explanation, connection, which is equal to argumentation. That's in the standards now. So that's something that we need to help teachers understand. So in order to do that, we need to help teachers elicit their arguments and appraise those arguments. And the third one is science learning is pointing to scientific community of practice. It's no longer just science for science sake, not just learning facts, but they're trying to see what is the character of scientific community? How do we socialize students into the scientific community? Which is an important thrust for pointing students to the academic careers or science careers. And so this kind of a model is important for teachers to understand for STEM higher learning and STEM careers. So now the proposed study is on science, technology, engineering enhancement plan, and Alan Sebastian is here. He's one of my partners from the Department of Science, and I'm so pleased that you are here. Our hypothesis is STE experts and science teachers will develop mutual learning from an awareness of one another, establishing symbiotic relationships. Usually, we think about going into the classroom like we are reaching out. There's an outreach. That's not a good thing to think about. When we do that, we feel as though we are the experts from the university. We are teaching teachers what to do and how to use knowledge. Instead, we need to be partners with them in knowledge development. Do we get anything from these teachers? Do we learn from them to look at our own practice, to examine our own practice? So it's a mutual learning, it's a symbiotic relationships. Thus, the STEAM project will study how learning-centered relationships proceed between STE experts at science, technology, and engineering experts and science teachers. So if teachers and students can develop symbiotic relational learning spaces, might STE experts who teach science teachers experience improvement of their own pedagogical practices, indicating a learning loop from science teachers back to STE experts. The scientists as well as engineers, they teach, their practice is very different from how they teach. I'm hoping that their practice, how they practice, is what they will translate into their teaching of undergraduate students and our teachers too. It's their practice that should characterize, not the way they teach. So the questions that I have there for that particular study is, what practical arguments do STE experts advance as they actively engage science teachers in professional development activities? The second question focuses on the science teachers. What practical arguments do science teachers advance as they take part in professional development activities and implement the EdCell series, that's a curriculum that we'll be developing in their own classrooms? How do these practical arguments influence science teacher, engineer experts, and science teachers' actions in their respective classrooms with their own students? So, I have developed 3 questions for future research. I've talked to you about my past and what I'm doing now, and looking toward the future with practical arguments. Questions?
We have lots of time for questions, comments.
Well, I have a comment.
Yeah.
My name is Venice Kada, and I am a doctoral student with Dr. Ebenezer as being my advisor. I'm really happy that I attended this conference today because some of my research centers around her research, it seems, and I've gotten quite a bit of information. It helped me to think, okay, which direction I would like to take some of my questions, or which directions I want to take some of my research when I'm working, because I will be working with teachers as well. And some of the comments that you suggested in your research, I never thought about it. As far as epistemology, with, you know, how to approach teachers, that, you know, we both learn from each other, and what I can take away from the teacher as I'm observing that teacher in her classroom or his classroom, what I could use in my practice, future practice.
Thank you.
That's
Yes.
Yeah, I thought there's two things that I noticed as you talked about the social character of learning as a social phenomenon. And the other thing you talked about was science, technology, education as sort of a broader theme in a way. That's how I'm seeing it in my mind. So the thing that I'm thinking about is like the, for lack of a better word, the sort of whenever there's an engagement between a teacher and a student, there's what I, for lack of a better word, would sort of call a therapeutic effect. That is, that student comes up with a new cognitive mind map that they didn't have before. But I also find that it changes the relationship between teacher and student. It becomes deeper and richer. And so I'm thinking of that as, maybe is that sort of fitting in with the model that you're talking about?
It does. It talks about the intellectually caring or empathetic model. And when we elicit whether it's students' knowledge or teachers' knowledge, we need to have a trusting relationship between students and the teacher, and the teachers and the professor. It's very, very important that we support them with their own ideas, and then we advance our ideas to go along with their ideas, rather than trying to change their ideas. If they want to change, that's fine, but I would like to see them as providing them alternative ways of thinking about it, so that they will add to their repertoire of teaching. Yes, David?
Well, I think I look forward to seeing the results of your STEEP project, because I like the framing around, you know, the types of arguments that the university people present and then the teachers present. So I was just wondering, in your kind of like your theoretical framework that you've done, you know, I enjoyed seeing how it's all mapped out. Why you've left out, you know, sociocultural approaches to communities of practice as a way of thinking about teacher learning as well.
So what's your question again?
Why did you, in your model,
Yeah.
did you leave out more sociocultural perspectives, you know, like based on the idea of practice from Leib and Wenger?
Yeah, so the question is not clear to me.
Oh, well, I see, you know, in your model,
Yeah.
you know, that you have here, just, you know, with the personal knowledge available,
Right.
personal practical autonomy, you know, why did you choose to leave sociocultural perspectives out of it as well, like activity theory, or, you know, the influence of practice, or, yeah, I'm just curious, because it.
Yeah, the sociocultural perspective comes, that is part, that's inherent, it's not explicit here, but it's inherent, because we do make social meanings when we interact, when we develop relationship between teachers and students, and teachers and ourselves. We have that mutually caring relationships, and also it's a socially constructed knowledge that is important to look at various problems in teaching. I would also add that it's beyond this social construction of knowledge. We come to consensus about certain knowledge, but I'm also thinking knowledge, it can be even dissensus. We do not have to always come to consensus about something. Scientists, the way they came up with, they generated so much knowledge and they advanced, they generated and validated their knowledge through socially, cultural posture to it. But on the other hand, they also had dissensus. When I read a lot of histories about how various knowledges were developed, I find that a lot of scientists were against one another in their social cultural background. That dictated or that made them think about what sort of knowledge would be valid, what kind of knowledge is not valid. So all those were not only social, cultural, even political, religious, all these things are influencing factors how knowledge gets generated and validated. You have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I just think I guess that's kind of what I was going at in terms of the communities of practice, because I think, a teacher classroom community has a perspective on what knowledge is valued versus the university science community, which has a perspective on what knowledge is valued, and just, to me, the sociocultural framework is also appropriate to looking in that. So I was just wondering why you hadn't used it.
It's a metaphor that we can use in the science classroom. If you look at the how scientific knowledge was developed and then validated, and if you translate that into the classroom and as a metaphor, I think it would be very useful to look at it from a socio-cultural perspective. But often that's not done. We think about science as mere facts rather than how students, rather than helping students to generate and validate that knowledge from a social cultural point of view. That's why when I think about science teachers, I think about them as ambassadors of the scientific community in the classroom. And it's taken only as a metaphor, not as a one-to-one relation, because the science classroom is very different from the scientific community of practice, where they have lots of tools and a lot of cultural and social tools to work with, and their knowledge is, the wide network of knowledge is very, very different from our science, from our students. But at least we can depict or characterize some of that in the classroom, then that will be profitable or worthwhile.
That's where my question is. For example, I'm a graduate student in molecular biology. So when a professor is trying to teach us how to do the research, she or he has a few students and they have a lot of time. Now when then we discover some things, and then they become papers and eventually textbooks. Now you're condensing like 20 years of research into one chapter, and then you have to teach that to 700 or 800 students in an undergraduate lecture room. Where does the time factor come? And then how can you actually take all those students and put them in labs and then show them how the process comes? Which is practically impossible. Now, for example, if there is in Iowa State University, what they're trying to do is, like, I don't know whether you know, on YouTube you have something called Khan Academy. This person actually makes all the videos of, math and physics and everything. So what they're trying to do is, the model is like, you put all the lectures as a video lectures, and then students go home, read them, read the textbook and watch the video, come to the classroom, and then you divide the classrooms into small labs where a professor or a moderator sits, and then they don't teach anymore. You just ask them the questions. So, well, that also requires a lot of infrastructure, and then
Right.
you have to limit classrooms for like 20 people, which is not easy at university level. I mean, scientists would like to teach what they learn, but then practically, culturally, and it's not possible.
There are many constraints. The time issue is there, energy, and I've been to science classes where there are 200 students in a lecture room. It's not easy. And sometimes only the video is running there, and the few students are taking notes. No professor even there. I've been to such classes. So it's not easy, but on the other hand, if you understand some of these educational frameworks, the defensible practices, I think we might be able to probe into other ways of helping our undergraduate students, because you're the ones who are educating our science teachers. They are getting their 4 years of work in a science lab, science classroom, and they in turn go to the science, go to the science classroom and teach the way they are taught, regardless of what we say or what we do in the College of Education. All right, so you are the people who are laying that foundation for our teachers. So this is why it's very important. NSF, actually, National Science Foundation, likes for us to work with teachers, work with scientists, work with engineers, work with technology people, all these different people, so that we have a multidisciplinary focus about student learning. And so, yes.
I'm Kathy Ebenezer's in Dr. Ebenezer's class, curriculum instruction. I'm not from the science world, so anyways, but I find it extremely interesting that the same thing that's going on in the reading world is also happening here, and I see it in the science world, in that you're becoming more conceptually oriented in your approach to teaching. And I know, like in science, my daughter is in high school, she's in 12th grade, and she's taking honors chemistry or something like that. But she comes home and just has to memorize terms. And she sits there and she has to memorize it, and the test is regurgitation of things. And conceptual just seems to be going out the window, but I'm sure her teacher was trained that way back in the day. But it is a new world. It's a new world in education. And in what you're talking about with the learning-centered relationship between the teacher and the students, it's a tight, and I love that term, symbiotic relationship. It's a symbiotism. It's just beautiful. And Dr. Whiten over in the reading department has discussed the same thing with the triad, the symbiotic. That we're using in the reading world too. And the connection between the teacher and the student. It's not like the teacher up there lecturing anymore. It's hands-on. We're actively engaged, and that's what the students want. That's how we learn. And I think your socially situated cognitive perspective is right on. And when you were talking about the word cultural, socio-cultural, I think that this is incorporated in that, because if you have a symbiotic type relationship with your students, you have to be culturally aware of them, otherwise you're not going to reach them. So I think that that's inherent, as you were saying, in the idea that you have this socially situated cognitive perspective. And I believe that you have taken it a step further, if I'm being correct, in that you are with the engineers and the scientists in the real world. You're taking real world, authentic sort of situations, and it sounds like more project-based sort of thing, hands-on, and that is what is so critical to have, because we need to have an education that relates to the real world. So when we get out, we understand what's going on, and we can have higher level thinking, because higher level thinking is where it's at. If we don't get that to that higher level thinking, then we are not really educating our children.
Good comments.
Thank you.
To lecture. Any other questions?
Dr. Ebenezer,
Yeah. Nostra.
I just wanted to, I don't know if it's, politically correct, but in the diagram here,
Yeah,
I was trying to jot down data, is stated on the screen, a socially situated cognition perspective of what now?
perspective.
Perspective of what?
Oh, perspective of science, science learning.
It's an approach to learning.
I would just like to make
You
a
have
comment.
a
Comment. Are you calling on me?
Yeah, yeah,
As a recently retired
yeah, introduce yourself.
educator in many realms of secondary science education, I think that the science classroom is going through a transition from, we push hands-on for a long time, and then we've come to the point where we realize that hands-on is not always practical or possible, given all the myriad of problems we have in the schools. So we have made, we're moving toward more digital learning, and that works very well. As you mentioned, the Khan Academy and those sorts of things are really taking on in schools like Cass Technical and different other situations. But the important thing is if you have a good teacher standing in front of that classroom and that teacher knows how to relate to the students, chances are that those students will become engaged and will learn. However, given the new breed we have in the classroom, it's not always that simple. So we see a lot of our new teachers coming out of the universities, and they're not ready for the culture shock of the classroom. They know their content, but knowing the content is one thing, but being able to relate to the students and being able to capture, to go where they are in terms of their digital savviness, all come into play in making a good teacher. And it usually takes at least a year and some good coaching from colleagues to make that happen. But it certainly is a struggle, given the transition of the classroom.
Alan, you have anything to say? Being a scientist.
I'm here as just as a sponge to soak up ideas from the education world. I'm from different universities at work, so all of these comments I find interesting and new. I'll weigh them.
Yeah, I hope our grant will get funded and I get an opportunity to work with the Alan and the other engineers. Yes, Kim, yeah.
My name is Kim. I am a college educated student, but I am not a teacher division student. I appreciate because when I take, this semester I take Dr. Ebenezer's class, I learn a lot from you because you give me what I do not have before. But I'm sorry because right now I'm going to ask a question. Is may stand in a little different perspective to build a teacher practice. Because this question confused me during this time. I hope you know because that related to my career plan, honestly. 2 weeks ago, I discussed a question with a fellow and because we are both under the same training. Even though when we say the evaluation training, before my background training all focused on statistical methodology. But when I transferred to Wayne State from my academic advisor, for example, Dr. Fahun, finally I know that evaluation has another word. So that's why in the United States, evaluation society separate from two. And I stand in different from, one is American Evaluation Association, the other one right now has been shown out, that's a Society of Research on Teaching Effective, that's the name total. I think the perspective is very different. And when 2 weeks ago when I discussed with my fellow, we discussed about some questions on that. I think you know that the problem of the American science math education. So she told me about her plan. She told me that, because I like her because she has a patient, just like that patient had failed from the doctoral student in teacher division. That the patient give me that's a hope of the future student. But then she told me a question. I want to do the evaluation. And then from the statistical, she does not tell me a lot, but because we are staying in the same frame, so I guess what she means is when she do the evaluation, statistics show that means that's all. But when she told me that, I started to have a very question that the problem is that your result, the central scene is empty. For example, when I see Dr. Ebenezer's diagram, I can immediately know that problem comes from the philosophy and the conceptual thing. I remember Dr. Ebenezer told in the class, what we have to let teacher know, maybe one thing is very important is whether the teacher knows some kind of philosophy and then can practice in the classroom. But if, as my fellow's words, she only look at the outcome, for example, teacher knowledge research. When they do the evaluation research, the outcome statistics show that if that's not significant, that means the teacher knowledge is nothing. So when I see this kind of report, I just think if follow my fellows' approach, they really do that kind of evaluation. Evaluation society totally separate from two groups. And from from my fellows' approach, I just start to think that even though they can get a sense, because I got a recent study about how teacher knowledge, just this early day, they examine that teacher knowledge and then teacher instruction and the students' pedagogical progress. But from their research, I cannot get anything meaningful. I don't know how to answer that question because the outcome is significant, different. I can understand, of course, they are statistical methodological genius. They know how to handle that issue. But the problem is, I don't believe they can handle those kind of conceptual ways, as Dr. Ebenezer you pointed out. So I just don't know that if someone asks me what's the teacher practice and they give me the answer is the evaluation results say yes. If there is no statistical differences, that means that teachers' practice is not effectiveness. So Dr. Ebenezer, would you give me some idea, how do I do response to them?
Different questions generate different kinds of knowledge. The evaluation people, they use their own methodologies and tools and all those things, and they generate different kinds of knowledge. Their philosophical questions that I have raised in my talk will yield different sorts of knowledge. So it all depends on the kind of question we ask and the kinds of tools that we employ. And it's also important to think about the epistemic quality, epistemic merit each of the research has.
So
I'll discuss that more with you in class.
Can I say, even though they hope to answer the question to improve the teacher practice, but their research question may not be really the question can help us get improve.
Like I pointed out, there are two ways of looking at it. One is the formal knowledge that you're talking about. The other strands, the other strands that in the diagram there, they talk about the practical reasoning or practical knowledge. So those are two different ways of thinking about it. And the study of teaching, to me, it's important that we look at the practices of teachers. What do they do in action? What are the premises behind a teacher's action? And that's how we need to develop knowledge rather than. And the final thing I want to say is we should help teachers know that they are knowers and they have developed those knowledge. it's not coming from us, but it's coming from them. It's the teacher, it's the author,